the hinterlands out onto mountain climbing, etc. So really, how do we facilitate conversations, and more importantly, coaching conversations across a variety of group members? In a few minutes, I'll talk about some of the distinctions between teams and groups, but let me just give you a quick definition of team coaching. Many of you, it sounds like, are doing team coaching. And for years, I think one of the things we're seeing right now in 2016 is, still a little bit of lack of clarity, especially on the part of our clients, organizations. How is team coaching different than team building, team development, other interventions? So this is a definition that comes from my second book, From One to Many. When I was asked by my publisher, Wiley, to write a second book, I said, we can't just focus on group coaching. We need to expand the lens into the realm of team coaching. And in fact, teams, in my mind, are really the thing that gets me very excited. It's been a huge part of my world of work. And I think really the value we bring as team coaches is creating that pause point, creating that space where people can come together in a team, intact team, virtual team, project team, for those ongoing series of conversations. Of course, in the coaching frame, we want to make sure we're focusing deeply on goal setting, on helping those team members create new awareness levels, get them into action, and create that container for accountability. We are seeing some great nuances continue to emerge, as we have in the last decade, around how teams are operating. Other authors like Amy Edmonston, if you haven't read her book, Teaming, she writes out of Harvard. And her book, although it's about 3 years old, really goes into some of the changing landscape of teams today. And I think that will keep us, whether we're practitioners or as coach trainers, really challenged in terms of how do we prepare coaches? How are we supported as coaches as we go to work with these ever complicated series of team environments? So one of the common questions I often get asked, and I'm sure this is a question you get asked if you're a coach trainer, is what are those differences between teams and groups? And it's something that I write about more in detail. Again, if you've got From One to Many, pages 19 to 25 goes into this. But there are some differences that make the two approaches slightly different. So differences in terms of the context, in terms of the role of relationships. Teams are there forever, and they are often living, breathing, eating, working, sleeping together. So unlike a group where we often come together and form and then disband, as coaches, we want to be aware of what is happening on a regular basis in between our dropping in of touch points. The role of leadership, absolutely essential in team coaching effectiveness. I've certainly had experiences, and I'm sure many of you have, where the engagement of the leader just was not there. Or perhaps as you are uncovering where the team is at, it points to team leadership. It's wonderful if we are able to work with leaders who are open, but many times we aren't. So that can be a real hindrance in terms of the effectiveness, the long-term sustainability of our work. And I think as a practitioner, what it means is we really want to make sure we're spending a lot of time on the front end, not only preparing the team, but really having deep dialogue with the team leader around what could this process mean in terms of impact. Now, many of you on a call today, I'm sure, are working with teams at multiple levels. In group coaching, especially if we're bringing groups of parents together or bringing people from across an organization together, we're really focusing on the individual development. As soon as we step in the team coaching realm, we're often looking now at the systems change. And that requires, I think, a greater level of understanding of organizational complexities, systems, etc. Another major issue that was really starting to come out in 2012 as I was writing From One to Many was just what's at stake? What's at stake in this work for our clients? And certainly in the team coaching realm, what's at stake can be huge, depending on dynamics. Really inviting people to be vulnerable, ensuring that they are in a perceived safe space to be vulnerable with team members is a huge issue that we as coaches need to be aware of and also feel confident in having approaches to work around that. Now, our role of coach also shifts across team and group. And as over the last 5-6 years, as I've talked with many ICF chapters and at large conferences and small conferences, many breakouts often get into this dialogue of how the role of the coach shifts. It's very different sometimes than in a one-on-one coaching relationship. Certainly, we can fade in and fade out as we're doing team coaching work. But it's important to recognize that the role of the coach is extremely different. So why is this all important? Just want to share with you a quote from Peter Senge. Of course, knowledge generation primarily occurs in working teams. Individual learning is a byproduct of what goes on in really innovative teams. But individual learning is not the goal. In fact, if it becomes the goal, you are in trouble. So I think in today's context, and this is, a huge part of my former interest as a professional, looking out at the global landscape, looking out at economics and politics, we all know 2016, it started off in some very interesting ways. I think team and individual group capability is going to continue to be such an important place of conversation, and more importantly, a place of change. So as peers, I'd love to just stimulate another question, as we think about the world of work of group and team coaches, whether you're doing it as a practitioner, whether you're training it. Curious to hear some examples of what's working well. What are some of the things that you're seeing in your work? Again, maintaining client confidentiality. What are some things that are working well? And if you would, again, like to just return to the chat function, just type in any sort of best practices, any examples of things that are working well right now for you in your world of work.
Hi, Jennifer. While we're waiting for those to come in, we had a question the last 2 slides ago. Somebody wanted to see if you could give any examples about the difference in role of relationship. It was one of the points on your slide.
Yes. So relationships, when I say the difference in the role of relationships as people are typing in teams, you usually have those relationships that are already started. So you may come in, sometimes we are working with a team that is newly forming, but many times we're coming in and the team has already been in existence. So it has its own history, its own culture. Part of our role is really to observe what's going on. And that's a little bit different than often in a group coaching context where the group is forming because of the work that we're doing. So really, as a group coach, we need to pay a lot of attention early on in creating those relationships, creating the safety, creating the trust. As I'm saying that, I'm also thinking, and certain pictures are flashing in my mind around teams. One of the common challenges, though, of a team coach these days is working with teams that have low levels of trust. So that's a whole other set of issues, but just the role of relationships can look very different in the world of a team coach and a group coach, as well as the lifespan of that grouping. So I say, in a group coaching process, typically the relationship, that entity, that grouping, may only be as long as the start and end of our work. And that's very different than in the realm of team coaching, where we come in and often we are parachuting in with, of course, integrity, but we're coming in and that system, that relationship series is going on and on. It works 24/7, as I said a few minutes ago. So I hope that's useful to those that had questions and wanted further clarification. Again, please continue jumping in like this. We've got a lot of people on the call today. And so I think I'll just, and again, you can also read these chats if you are on Zoom. I know we've got people who are not on Zoom, so I'll just read out a few of these, hoping that my bifocals are really working here. They're new. So what's working well? Getting lots of referrals for individual coaching. Some people would like to have a group to filter in. Another, getting full engagement from the group through provocative questions is working well. Have also done modified simulations to help people put theory into action. So this begs the question, with this form of teaching, using simulations to get theory into action, does it take it out of the realm of coaching and into consulting? Well, I've got a slide sort of that touches on that. And I think as we move into the realm of group and team coaching, we are leaving sometimes the realm of pure coaching. I had an email from Phil Sondell overnight. And many of you may know Phil as one of the co-authors of Coactive Coaching, but he's also the founder of Team Coaching International. And Phil is doing a webinar right now at the same time, so he couldn't be here. But Phil, along with many others, are doing quite a bit of work right now on what are our team coaching competencies. And I'm part of some of those dialogues. And I think as we continue to move through 2016, 2017, we're going to really be wanting to have more conversation around what are those specific team coaching competencies that we want to be training people around, etc. There's been some very interesting research going on in several PhD programs that I'm aware of, that I've been part of, who are mapping team coaching competencies. So keep your eyes open. I think this is a really big issue for this year. And we also had Dorothy saying to everyone, understanding interconnectivity, systems principles, and the need to be part of the process. Getting lots of referrals, moving theory into action. I think I'm referring to the same ones here, but there's some really interesting comments in terms of collective intelligence, etc. So really working well as we look out to the landscape of what's working really well. We're seeing how group and team coaching can be integrated in different ways. So the right-hand side of the screen is related to team coaching. I almost should have had like two slides on this. But in terms of group coaching, we continue to see that group coaching can be just a standalone process. Maybe you're working with a group of parents. They come together for 3 months, 6 months, and they can explore issues like, how am I a better parent? What's my vision of working with my child who has special needs? What are our value systems as a family? And a standalone group coaching program today is quite common, as is in many organizational contexts, this follow-on. You know, what got me really excited as an educator for many, many decades was the ability of coaching to keep the conversation going. That's what really attracted me early days to like go into coach training. It was because I was running these retreats all over the world for staff teams, and they would leave the retreat sites so excited, so jazzed with an action plan. And what do you think happened? I'd call them or email them like a week later saying, hey, how's it going? Oh, that was so great, Jen, but I'm so busy. And this really, to me, is the value of coaching, is the sustained focus. So we are seeing in the realm of group coaching, a lot of larger and smaller organizations are now embedding group coaching as a follow-on to training. So let's say they have a leadership development program or any sort of program. You go through the training and then you work with a coach afterwards. It's about integration of the learning, but it's also about the awareness of the development of the professional. And some other programs, including ones that I've worked on, we may be fortunate enough to actually embed group coaching with training. So for many years, I worked with an organization, and in addition to the training modules, we built in group coaching touch points in between those quarterly training modules. So it really meant that people became a lot more aware of what they were learning, putting things into practice as they went, which, as we know, really, really boosts learning, change, etc. So we had a comment a few minutes ago. I just want to draw your attention to just the sort of the 4 quadrant on the bottom of the frame. You know, again, I'm sure many of you also get asked, well, how is coaching different from other modalities? And I continue to like to bring people back to some of the ICF research from 2009, the ICF 2009 Global Coaching Client Survey that they did, which reinforced many of our ICF competencies. You know, coaching clients at that time were saying, the coaches focus with me on goals, action, awareness, and accountability really makes coaching distinct. So we had a question a few minutes ago in the chat. You know, one person, and I've lost my chat bar, so let me see if I can bring it up again. Someone was asking, you know, am I moving more into the realm of consulting? And I think many times as group and team coaches, we may question, am I moving into consulting? Am I moving into facilitation? Am I moving into training and other related disciplines? And I think it is prudent to stop ourselves regularly, reflect ourselves in our work, and really ask ourselves, how are we holding space for the clients to be articulating goals, measuring their success? How are we making sure that there are these sustained touch points and focus on accountability? And of course, the realm of the coach, the dual planes of action and awareness. So beyond that, I think we could have a series of other conversations. How do we distinguish all of these related modalities? It's very important. And I think mastery in the realm of group and team coaching means that we do go into the realm of other areas: conflict resolution, facilitation skills. We really do need to bring the best of other related disciplines into our work, but lead from these 4 areas. So a couple of other things. We're going to take another little chat break in a moment. I think we'll do like verbal chat, not written chat. But just in terms of team coaching, approaches, things that we're seeing today, of course, a lot more focus on virtual team coaching, not only in person. Again, I think a lot of this is dependent on who do we work with, what's the level of comfort, but with technologies like Zoom, it can really bring a team together. You can do cool things, have people doing things in their own location. You can see each other as you're streaming. So it makes not only the conversation easier, but if you're bringing in tools like a Wheel of Life, and not only wanting to do it on paper, but physically get people on a somatic level to actually experience it in their office, they can do that. They can see their colleagues. Your volume issues might be an issue, but I think it's a good trade-off when you can actually see others. Again, there's been some interesting, I think, what is happening in the team coaching realm. There's been such an explosion of this work. And I always like to point to people who are sort of tracking things. So there is a great podcast series that started last winter, 2015, and it's facilitated by Dr. Krister Lowe, who is out of New York City. Krister has, I think he's about 50 or 60 in. He's done an hour-long podcast with practitioners. His goal is to do 100 different podcasts. It's called the Team Coaching Podcast Zone, or the Team Coaching Zone podcast. And if you have a chance to listen to some of those, I think it really just gives you this idea of just the variety of different types of models, approaches we're using as we move into this realm of sustained focus on conversations with teams. Some of us have come in through, the high performance route. As you heard, for many years, even before I was a coach, I was a certified performance technologist. And still to date, people ask me, what the heck does that mean? And that really is like performance improvement within a systems focus. So a lot of what we do as coaches, but I've come in more from the meta level of looking at programming, obviously in the world of the UN, look at how do you facilitate national or regional development. So the cool thing, and I sort of say the cool thing is teams as well are ever changing. If we look out, and I don't know if any of you work in agile team coaching, there's been some great writing around agile team coaching as well, which is blending agile plus team coaching. So stay tuned as many of these things continue to morph. So we're going to do a little bit of another sort of conversation break, and we'll see just how crazy it gets. We're going to get people to unmute, I think. And I wanted to spend just a few minutes on coaching competencies. So what you can see here is a wheel on the floor of a training. I always like to ask the question, what are your strengths as a team and a group coach? Regardless of what coaching model you're using, what are the strengths and competencies you lead with? I said a few minutes ago, we are really at a crucial point in our history of coach trainers to look at the nuances of not only the foundations of the ICF, but what else is needed for masterful team and group coaches. So I'm going to try this out. We'll see. I think we might have about 30 people on the line, right, Haley?
58.
58. Okay, so maybe this isn't going to work well. But
I would say ask people if they want to speak to unmute. Not everybody.
Yes. So I think just because you've heard my voice for quite a long time, certainly longer than in the realm of group coaching, if you'd like to share, I'm going to invite you to just maybe share it's maybe strengths you see in yourself as a team and a group coach, or strengths that you see in masterful team and group coaches. What are things that masterful team and group coaches do is the foundational question. Just love to get a few ideas floating out. As you look at the work in action, again, as practitioners, what do masterful team and group coaches do, or what skills do they lead by? And if you'd like to chime in, now is your opportunity to unmute your mic. If you'd like to share your name, let's just see if anyone would like to jump in with a comment or two around what do you see as masterful skills for group and team coaches?
You might want to stop the share on your screen at this point, Jen, just for
okay.
a moment.
Yep. All right.
When people realize there's other people, they might like.
So let's see how this is a provocative group. Let's see if anyone would like to share some of the skills you see as being important. And if you are on Zoom, what's going to happen as you start to speak unmuted, you're going to move to this center screen. So we'll actually see people hopefully talking.
Hi, Jen. This is Dorothy Siminovich.
Hi, Dorothy. Welcome. So you do a lot of work in this arena, from what I've heard. What do you see from your perspective?
Well, I'm just enjoying you, and I didn't want there to be a silence. So, I just really am loving your work. I'm loving your delivery. Yeah, I think you got to know yourself as a group facilitator. You really have to know what you bring. You have to have an understanding of phases of development, beginning, middle, and end of a group. Kind of the structure of what a group looks like, or what to expect at the beginning, at the middle, at the end. And using yourself as a barometer, knowing when you really want to intervene at the beginning and how to get out of the way to let the group really engage in the work. Just looking at what you've added with the coaching competencies, I think it really is maybe very important to be able to underline as the core connector with team coaching is what are your goals and what's your way of getting the work done. And then the rest, I really think, is knowing what your facilitation skills are. So I've said a lot for right now. I'd like to step back and to give the space to someone else. It's a very exciting podcast. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Dorothy. And again, I think as many of us do see that blend of facilitation skills and the importance, as ICF continues to point, what does success look like? And again, this is success on the cumulative team level. How do we define it? What does it look like? How does that interface in our current practices if we interface that with team effectiveness? So thanks for jumping in, Dorothy. Would anyone else like to chime in with a few other skills that they're seeing from their perspective as being useful?
Hi, this is Mary Beth.
Hi, welcome. What do you see from your perspective?
This is Nadine, and I think I heard somebody else, but I'll continue. I wanted to go a little further with the last words of Dorothy as to facilitating the meeting. I think the group or team coach needs to be a leader in conversation that is helping the group or team to go from a transactional type of discussion to a real coaching in co-creation mode type of conversation.
Great, thank you. And that was Nadine, and I think I heard Mary Beth. What would you like to add, Mary Beth?
Hi, Jennifer. Yeah, wouldn't you know it that right as I'm speaking, the garbage truck is passing by on the street. So you may hear that in the background. I often are telling my students and also the teams I work with that I see that there's 4 competencies with live team coaching. And one, I think the most important one really is it's the opportunity it's one of the few opportunities different from process consulting where we can help the leader facilitate their own meetings. Because we don't have to totally take over the facilitation, so we can be helping them and coaching them to be the facilitators of their own meetings. I think we also can help the business agenda stay on track, because often teams they get so into their own tangents that they get lost. And I think if we don't help them interrupt their own patterns, then we haven't been doing our job. So I think that's really central. And then, when I work with teams, I also just so everybody is learning together at the same time, rather than just going, oh, well, the leader's going to learn something. I have them identify their own individual goals in terms of how they're going to be better team members. And so helping and tracking the team to stay on track with their own goals of being better team members.
Excellent. And again, notice the variance, the variety. Thanks, Mary Beth, for that. I don't know. I didn't hear the garbage truck going by, but mine will be going by pretty soon as well. So we'll see. But I think again, in groups, you don't always have these same nuances. And we had a question come up from Dahlia on the chat. Do you think a group coach can do it without being a facilitator with no experience in facilitation? And I think whether we're working with groups or teams, facilitation is a really useful skill set to have. I'll go back to my slides in a few minutes, but really be working as individual practitioners, we want to reflect on what is the skill base we're drawing upon. And this is where I think there's tremendous opportunity to be learning from related fields. As much as we want to be seen as distinct as professional coaches, I think we also can really learn a lot from moving into the terrain of whether it's process facilitation, whether it's, again, systems theory. There's just so many related fields that we can be tapping into. So thanks to you, Mary Beth. Anyone else want to put in their thoughts around other competencies for team and group coaching? Okay, well.
I would just like to put in a plug for the being-based coaches in the room. Is just being able to walk into a room and in very short order get at the fundamental dynamics of the existing teams, and not only being able to sense and determine some of the dynamics that might be getting in their way, but also being willing to say so. Not seeing it and not saying it. So be both seeing and saying, oh, wow, there's something going on here. What do you guys see when I say this? So actually being able to get at some of that essential nature of the group that may be invisible to them.
Absolutely. Making the unconscious conscious and helping the team recognize its patterns. I think I'm going to slip right into the sharing my screen again, because so many of you have captured just the few words I wanted to include around coaching competencies. Again, we want to make sure that we are using and leading from the ICF competencies. If we're not, I think then we are creating a whole slippery slope of everything. Again, we need to be working from the ethical lens. Notice that we could have a whole conversation on this. There are some interesting nuances and dynamics that happen potentially on an ethics level if we are coaching groups and teams. Always asking ourselves, should we be bringing in an additional coach? Certainly when I work with teams, if individual coaching is needed, more often than not, I will bring in an individual team, an individual the coach to work with the separate team members more often than not, just because if we have agreements around transparency across as a team as a system, it can get very murky. It can get very complicated to maintain confidentiality if we also have individual relationships with those people. But I did want to point where many of you have as well. I think masterful group and team coaches really understand group and team process and dynamics. Not all of us have come up through the ranks, and this certainly was my experience from the age of 17 when I went off to university. I was always leading or part of I think today we'd call them very intense teams. So I worked in one of our provincial parks. We were together for 10 weeks of the year. We went through the storming, forming, norming, performing, and adjourning every summer for 10 weeks. You see team dynamics playing out. And then for almost 3 years, I lived and worked with my staff team. We had a headquarters office. We were connected with our field teams of like 10 people each in 10 separate jungle locations through short-range radio. If we could not get together as a headquarters team, it was a life or death situation. And our bedrooms were just off our office. So that is pretty you learn a lot about team dynamics and team process. And even in today's world, it's gotten even more complicated. How do we work across cultures? How do we work and lead and excel as virtual teams? This certainly is today's sort of biggest question mark. And as someone who went on from leading those remote teams in one country then to leading teams across 10 countries, it's a very exciting place. But how do we ensure everyone's running together, especially when you now have cultural lenses? I've included experiential education, not only because those were my roots, but very much, how do we help people learn through doing? How do we help people learn and connect and build in those pause points, those reflection points? Today, I think another skill set which is key is the ability to help people work across differences. A couple of you talked about the role of the coach and also helping team members share, I would say, common processes, common systems. Many team coaches, I think, are brought in because teams can't work well together. So how do we help them create a common share of the, of a framework that works similarly? And sorry, I'm trying to read the actual chat as I'm speaking, not a good thing. Another thing, and this came up, I think Dorothy and a few of you mentioned this, leveraging peer process. What is exciting today is we're starting to see peer coaches, pop up in organizations, not only at Microsoft, but other organizations. And peer coaching, I think we can work very well with, maybe we start off as group and team coaches externally, and then move on to really be working in building a coaching culture in organizations. So last year, I was very fortunate to do a lot of work in a healthcare system, training up 160 of their healthcare leaders, both clinical professionals like doctors and nurses, but also the administrative professionals. And they've been able to take that back into their organization, into their teams, who are also using Agile. So again, we may be learning as well. I knew a little bit about Agile, but not as much as I know now. But it was really critical to understand the lay of agility, of Agile, to be effective as a coach and as a coach trainer with those professionals. I'm going to just share a little bit more because I know we are quickly moving through our time together.
And there are quite a few questions in the chat, so you might want to...
And so maybe as you're just looking at this slide, pitfalls and tricky issues. And one question from Mickey, also appreciate noting the ICF core competencies. It seems that all of the competencies that exist within individual coaching align with team coaching. Are there marked differences? And in fact, this is a whole chapter of From One to Many, not to sell the book, but this was something I felt was really important to look at. How do we map for both group and team coaching? How do we map the ICF competencies? What are the approaches that we're using as practitioners in group coaching, team coaching? So for example, establishing the coaching agreement. What does that look like as a best practice for groups versus teams? How are we creating ways of working or group agreements, which, note, exist only for that time together? When you're working with teams, the team agreement may happen on two levels. You may be working with team agreements for our work as team and coach, but also helping the team articulate what are the team agreements for their work day in and day out. I just stopped the share because I was trying to grab that screen again. Let me just go back here. So there are some distinctions. And again, I could do a whole other hour on it, but for those interested, one of the chapters in From One to Many, I have it here. I'll see if I can also multitask with that. I want to say it's chapter 4, but one of the chapters does go into it. It's chapter 3, Core Skills for Team and Group Coaching in From One to Many. So that was one of our questions. Hilly, what else have you tracked that should be important for me to note?
Somebody was talking about where they could get training for team coaching. Somebody wanted you to speak to ethical nuances beyond confidentiality with team or group coaching.
Okay. And background in OD, I'm seeing. So I'll say just a few more words on competencies, and again, just to make sure we're getting into some of this other terrain. I think if we also look to other similar competency models. So the International Association of Facilitators actually has a competency model. One of theirs, and I don't have it in front of me, but it talks about questioning. It also talks about developing your agreements with the client body. And for myself, I was a process facilitator for many, many years. I trained as a process facilitator as a grad student in the early 1990s. And in fact, a large part of my work globally within the UN and these Canadian and British organizations was to facilitate policy level meetings, strategic planning meetings for governments, for regional governments, for national governments. And I think, if we really look at how closely aligned facilitation and coaching are once we move into the realm of many, it can be very similar. What is different though, and again, going back to that 4-quadrant model, how are we working with goals? How are we holding the client grouping as responsible, as creative, resourceful, and whole? All of these things that make up the coaching philosophy. And more importantly, how are we supporting people through awareness and action? As a process facilitator, my orientation was much more towards gaining insight and moving on, but at a very different level than working with teams or group members, where it's learning about those deep layers of self-awareness. So I'll just say that, and ethical nuances beyond confidentiality, I think this warrants a whole other conversation. What I can say is I've been blogging on the topic of group coaching and team coaching for the last decade. If you've never checked out the Group Coaching Ins and Outs blog, I will have it at the end of the slide. It's groupcoaching.blogspot.com. And what I'll commit to doing is doing a highlight on some ethical issues in the next month or so on the blog, just very high level, but it'll get people thinking about some of those additional nuances. I think ethics in all professions today are so important, and it really does warrant a whole other conversation. So before we get too much further, I know Dorothy had said, please announce your training here in Toronto. So 3 times a year, I do a 2-day in-person training program. The next Toronto session is coming up April 2, 3, and that is the Group and Team Coaching Intensive. That is a 2-day face-to-face training approved for ICF credits, CCEs, and that's 19 hours of continuing coach education. I continue to run the Group Coaching Essentials program, which is a 5-week teleclass approved for 8.75 CCEs, and the Advanced Practicum. The Advanced Practicum, of course, gets people into the practice, which takes us to today's slide of pitfalls and tricky issues for coaches. So I think what I am continuing to see, and these are really the growth edges for us as a profession, how do we expose students, how do we expose ourselves to the continued range of variants of group and team interactions? This work it's not easy to just step into if you haven't been part of groups or teams. So how do we expose people to that? How do we expose group and team coach trainees into practicing these skills? Whether it is shadowing, whether it is working with live groups, simulation groups, but we want to really get beyond just the conceptual dialogue like we're having today into the art, form, and practice. There are a lot of huge, tricky issues that can occur. So how are we also mentoring people? How are we getting them to think through the range of the engagement from before you start and developing trust and relationships with your group and team members to, after looking at evaluation, which really is part of the whole cycle. Just as in the rest of our profession, how do we market this work? How do we develop business around it? I like to say to new team coaches that more often than not, it's not like letting the world know and you think 6 months down the road I'm going to be needed. It's often like, we have a team right now that needs you. Can you show up next Friday and start working with this team? So again, I think in the realm of teams, it can be very reactive, especially if it's a team that might be going through a bit of crisis themselves. And again, it's not a team that needs therapy, but it is a team that needs some common frameworks, common approaches to help them move from crisis or floundering into that place of excelling. Group coaching is a little bit different. And again, we're sort of even bringing the two together for this 1-hour call. Marketing is a whole beast in and of itself. I designed an on-demand video-based program on marketing group and team programs last year, which was originally on Udemy and is now over at a new site that I've got called the Learning Lab and Design Studio. And I think marketing is key for coaches who want to go out and market a public program. So it takes time, and that may be part of your coach training process or not. I'm just noticing the time, so I want to make sure I get to a few other things, because linking it back to what we heard from others, There are some tricky issues that can exist around group dynamics, and this is now tricky issues with clients of the grouping. How do we work across differences? How do we support group and team members to work across differences? Chances are, if you're working in this realm, you're going to be working and helping your group and team members work with different styles, whether you're using a DISC in all its iterations or other assessments. How do we work with conflict? Again, I think this is a really interesting level, conflict at all levels, not just team, organizational, but now we have global conflict happening. So how do we create more coach-like conversations there? Tricky issues around design as well. And I think for most new coaches, and even for us as experienced coaches, there can be this very dynamic tension in our work of like, how much do I prepare and when do I let it go? Again, as a coach, we're needing to meet the team or the group as they are. But we can't always just walk into a situation. There's some planning and thinking about that. Some of you too, like myself, may be doing some of your team coaching work with a co-facilitator. So for larger teams or complex teams and larger groups, I usually do work with a co-facilitator. That in and of itself is a whole other set of skills that we're bringing and our ability to dance together. When I say co-facilitator, both of us are usually certified coaches so that we're really coming with the similar framework, although it may be different coaching models. Design, we've talked in this call, again, knowledge and mastery in related fields. And when I say that, I mean facilitation, OD, it may be technical fields, right? It really depends on where you're working and who you're working with. And finally, tricky issues around practice. Again, how do we create the opportunity to practice in safe spaces? This is not only for the team, but the coach themselves. This work can be very emotionally charged. Here in Ontario, where I operate, 5 years ago, almost now, we had some new workplace legislation roll in, which was around workplace violence and harassment. It impacts the work of trainers, of coaches, and for about 3 months, I was going out for an organization and doing train-the-trainers with their internal training team. And, we often don't recognize how quickly things can escalate. So do we have skills in de-escalation as well? That's takes us into the realm of conflict management. Practice opportunities, of course, how do we expose people to a variety of clients? And a tricky issue for some of us is our ability to be that chameleon. We talk in the ICF competency of direct communication. How are we able to change our language? How are we as coaches able to take away some of our coach ease, as I like to say? Our language is not always resonant when we're working in safety or transportation. So our ability to be a chameleon and, of course, work on our feet. So we are coming to the close. I want to leave you with a couple of questions, which are, what can we do? And also, what's next? So what can we do and what's next for you? I've got just a couple more reference slides, but as we start drawing into this last few minutes of our call, if you'd like, I want to thank you for being here today, but more importantly, what's this inspiring you to do? Whether you're a coach trainer or you're a practitioner, what's next for you? There is a wide road in front of us. And I'm curious if you'd like to share what's going to be next in your journey as a team and group coach. If you'd like to share that, please do so. I certainly think there's a lot of terrain that we can be walking with our clients. Certainly, I'm always amazed to hear in my world of work just where group and team coaching is showing up and really making a significant difference in the world. I'd invite you to think about where you want to be putting your attention this year. So I don't see any chats yet, but I do want to point you to some more resources. And again, this slide deck will be sent out to you. So I've just listed my 2 books. Dave Clutterbuck's Coaching a Team at Work is an excellent resource. It's 2007, but still very, very relevant. Ginger's book, Group Coaching Blueprint, also offers some really important frames and examples. Peter Hawkins over in the UK, Leadership Team Coaching, and he's been in New York this week, I think, doing some team coaching training. And Christine Thornton, also out of the UK, has a book on group and team coaching. So there's increasingly more in the marketplace. If you are interested in some resources, my last book, From One to Many, was too big. They couldn't fit in 3 chapters, 100 pages of material. So you can download some team and group coaching case studies at this link. There is a code that you'll need to enter, 4411, when prompted. And I've also made reference to the group coaching blog. I do hope you'll drop by, and if you have some topics like this one on ethics that I've committed to doing some writing around, let me know. You know, I often run out of topics. I've been writing on this for 10 years. What else should I talk about? But calls like today have reminded me that there is just so much more that we can be and should be talking about in the realm. Last spring, Gary Schleifer at Choice also had a whole issue dedicated to team and group coaching. So you can download my article, and you can also check out Choice Magazine. It's been exciting. I'm just looking at people who are indicating what you're doing, and I want to thank all of you in terms of what's next. You know, I don't know who said it, but in order to affect change, you know, it doesn't just take one person, it takes the whole village of people. A couple of you had wanted upcoming courses, and so here's the listing of things that are happening online. And with that, thank you for your active participation today and for having me join you. So Henley, I'll pass it back to you with that.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here. I'd love to see other faces if you could stop your screen share. And I just have a couple of announcements on behalf of ACTO. Thank you again, Jen. And I think everybody this is obviously a topic that people are fascinated by and want so much more information on. So thanks for providing all of the resources. The recording of this call and Jen's slide deck will be available on our website, actoonline.org. I also want to announce our next forum call, which is on Wednesday, February 17th. And this is going to be a call about ethics. For you, Nikki, ethics and next level coaching. One of our, I think she's from Mexico, one of our friends who's come through, Elena Espinal, Mirna Perez, is passionate about ethics and coaching, and she'll be speaking to us about that. And I also want to let you know about our conference coming up in June, our annual ACTO conference, which is a fantastic conference, my favorite one of the year. It's June 15th through 17th in Phoenix this year, and the theme is Raising the Flame of Excellence. We have our first keynote to announce. Linda Miller from the Blanchard Group is going to be our opening keynote at the conference. We're looking forward to that as well. So thank you so much for being here today and participating. Thanks again, Jen. And see you all next month.
Take care, everyone. Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.